So I've got the pleasure of being joined by Ian Gregory, CTO at Advancetrack, and we're going to dive into today a bit about cybersecurity because I'm finding that there seems to be more and more articles, news about the fact that this is a growing issue, and maybe it's the fact that with AI now that's becoming more, sophisticated. But I don't know if this is just my gut feel. So, Ian, is this something you're experiencing in, I guess, for your role and also in the accounting profession?
Yeah, I think it's massively growing, and it's always been there. But I think the visibility of it in accounting seems to be growing very much. Certainly in the last year or so, it's been a much bigger topic. Going back, I remember when I first started with Advancetrack, I asked my boss, Paul, what keeps you awake at night? And his answer was a security breach. Um, so over the last 8 years since I've been involved in the company, we spent a lot of time and effort making sure that our systems are secure. And I go to a lot of talks on security and that sort of thing, so I'm up to date. So seeing this sort of thing all the way through, it gets scarier and scarier. Just to give you an example, I was at a talk a few weeks back, and they were explaining how now there are people using AI to stimulate and simulate video images of people and their voices to get the multi-factor codes to log on to their emails to hack. Um,
Yeah.
it's really, really scary what's going on. And our mindset, we've in terms of our business, we've followed the ISO approach. So we've got 27001, 27701, 22301, and that's really a case of look at your risks, look at how important they are, and then how do you mitigate those. So we routinely go through our risks and look at what we can do to mitigate. And I think we've got about 180 risks in our register at the moment.
That's
Um,
a long risk register. So,
it's
uh,
very risk register.
yeah, and it shows. And I know a lot of firms can do a similar thing, right? Most don't go maybe as far as the ISOs, but they do Cyber Essentials Plus. And they're kind of on that pathway. But I guess something you've raised now is I'm starting to question whether I am with the real Ian Gregory or an AI version. So that's something I'll have to try and work out as we go through this. Ask some questions that, but I know throw AI. But are you finding that this is becoming a bigger risk for accounting firms? And as I guess structures and software utilization is changing, that what traditionally was a good setup for cybersecurity has now evolved, and you have the risk areas are changing. Is that something we're finding?
Yeah, I mean the risks are evolving over time. I think the days when hackers would go directly into systems are largely gone. Mostly these days, they use soft attacks, so they'll try and get in by trying to persuade an individual to give away their password or a multi-factor code. There are still opportunities around things like patching if you've got your own servers. We avoid that by using cloud ones. So there are things you can do, but generally speaking, most of the attack surface is email. And I have been known to suggest to accounting firms to ask the question, do you actually need to give all your staff email these days? Because if you've got Teams and Zoom, actually, do you need it for internal communication? Because the
And
fewer email accounts you've got, the less your attack surface.
and that is a very good point. And there's lots of modern systems now where threats management systems where it kind of drags you away from your email directly into a central communication channel. And then, as you say, you're only using email to communicate externally, mitigating some risk. I mean, it does baffle me that people give away voluntarily their multi-factor authentication code. That I guess is an education thing more than a security issue. So, is it that rather than, I guess, bolstering security, educating your team is more critical now?
It's a key thing. I mean, we run routine awareness training for all of our team, and that's something people need to be doing. But at the end of the day, it's making it real. I mean, the trouble is with a lot of these things, they're sort of e-learning courses, People do it and they go through the ropes, but they don't see how real it is. And then suddenly they're busy. Somebody rings them up and goes, "You're having trouble logging in," and before you know it, you've got a problem. So really, it's about making it in the live environment and making sure that you've done everything you can to mitigate it. But I think ultimately you just have to accept you are going to get hacked. So a lot of the thinking is, okay, if we get hacked, how do we minimize the impact so it's not reportable?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
is limited as much as you can.
Is that siloing data to some extent? So if you are hacked, it only gets to a certain point. They can't get to everything. Is that one way?
Yeah, that's an element of it. On emails, for example, we do have emails, but we only use them for scheduling meetings. So we basically, if somebody sends me client data by email, they'll get a nasty email back saying, "Don't do it," because we have systems to manage the flow of client data backwards and forwards, and email isn't part of it. But that means, if we did have an email hack, then actually we're only exposed to meeting schedule data, not anything that's actually important.
So what would you advise then accountants do to keep their data safe?
If you talk to the insurers, the one thing they will say that you must have is backups that cannot be deleted or overwritten. So some sort of air gap, so split apart from the main systems by actually not being connected, or something that literally can't be overwritten. And basically, if the scenario you mentioned at the beginning, if you've got that air gap backup, then no matter if you get hacked, you will be able to recover. If you
Yeah.
have that and the hackers manage to get to the backup and encrypt the backup as well, then you're out of business. So if there's one
Yeah.
thing you can do to make sure you're safe, it's make sure you've got separate backups.
And do it regularly. Don't it daily. If it's great, but yeah, make sure you're doing it regularly. The other bit I find is that um, you know delete your old backups, because I've worked in firms where they've had decades worth of backup data that they've never got rid of, which now becomes a different issue. That becomes more of a GDPR issue, because you've still got information on customers you probably should have, or clients or employees you probably should have got rid of. So yeah, back it up, have the air gap, but also make sure you've got a deletion policy in place for that as well, actually.
Yeah, and I would agree. I mean, ultimately, there's an interesting debate as to how much data should you hold, and we quite often have it around inboxes. Should I delete everything from my inbox immediately, which means it can't
Yeah.
be hacked, or should I store it so we've got an audit trail if anything comes up that we might have a problem with? And even when you look at the legals, there's an argument that says if you've deleted it, you're safer. So
Yeah.
interesting debate there, and I'm not quite sure what the answer is. I haven't come to a conclusion yet, but certainly you
No.
don't want to be holding any more than you legally need to be, particularly if you've got an audit trail requirement, as you would for, let's say, the ICAEW.
Yeah, there's definitely a balancing act. Look, thanks, Ian, for coming on. I think hopefully this has been very informative, especially on a security side, which become more and more of a risk for accounting firms. And hopefully they've got some little nuggets they can take away with them.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.